Lee.
I'm Lauren Forrester.
And I'm Kimena Salem.
And we're here to talk about the crisis in Yemen. We'd like to thank you for watching our video.
All right, so the current situation in Yemen is quite horrible. There's a lot of famine, a lot of disease outbreak. There's currently a war going on between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia. We are contributing to a lot of civilian deaths from the United States, and we want to talk to you about how we have gotten there and what we can do to help. So we'll start with how we got there. So basically, in the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire stepped in and took control of northern Yemen. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire dissolved, leaving northern Yemen free and independent, where several leaders eventually took over. A few hundred years later, in the 1800s, British took control of the port of Aden, which is a city in southern Yemen, where basically a lot of trade goes on. It has a lot of good access to other countries. In addition to this, there's a lot of fighting between the southern Yemenis and the British, which eventually allowed them to withdraw. After they withdrew, southern Yemen became independent and they became the People's Republic of Yemen. A few years later, the communist force, so the Soviet Union, stepped in and they eventually tried to take control of southern Yemen. After that dissolved, they eventually tried to unite with northern Yemen under the ruler President Salah, which was the ruler of northern Yemen at the time.
So now we jump on the 2000s, around 2000s. President Salah is still in charge of the country, and he's ruling with Alvi on his side as vice president. So around 2004, a group called the Houthis appear in northern Yemen, which are an anti-Semitic, anti-American group, which are basically all against American involvement in their war. So then after a couple years, Salah gets out of office, but now the vice president, Albi, wasn't there. It was Hadi, and he gets into presidency. So at this point, everything seems to be kind of okay, but then the Houthis start to get angrier by the minute. So in order to get back into power, Saleh joins the Houthis while they start going south towards Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen. At that point, Hadi has to flee to southern city Aden, and the Houthis are now in charge of Sana'a. After a couple of years of fighting there, they start making their way down to Aden, which leads Hadi to flee the country to Saudi Arabia. And at that point, Al-Qaeda is now appearing on the side, which is not really contributing much at the time, but it's still a big important part of that whole deal. So then, after a couple of months or a year, Hadi comes back to Aden, and he takes back the city and starts pushing back the Houthis up north. At that point, they kind of do it, but it's still very disputed there. There's a lot of war going on. And then the Emiratis come in and they start helping, trying to get the Houthis away from the ports, because if they get a hold of Hodeidah and Aden, they will be in charge of most of what goes in and out of the country, because those two ports connect the Red Sea and the Arab Sea with the rest of the world, which is not a good idea if you have such a disputed area going on there. So we jump up to 2011 when the Arab Spring happened. This was a situation in which there was a civil war, and a lot of the people who weren't involved in the whole Houthis versus the coalition fight started getting involved with the Houthis or with the coalition, even if they weren't sided with any of them, because they just didn't like the other group. In around 2016, there was a cholera outbreak because of the whole sanitation deal that wasn't being taken care of because of the war. And so now we have a lot of people dying and a lot of people that have been killed because of drones coming in from Saudi Arabia as part of the coalition attacks on the Houthis.
So now that you have some background on Yemen, you really see why there's such problems. The government, since basically the beginning of time, has never been a stable government. They've never, and this is due to their geography and their mountainous regions with lots of caves and isolation from the rest of the world. And this really goes to show how much geography can have an impact on how a government and society is formed. But really, like, just this unstableness and consistent change in power has really created a weak country that its government hasn't been able to protect the people from all the different terrorist groups in the area. So now what are we left with? Drone strikes, famine, disease crisis, and about any other terrible things you can think of. The war in Yemen isn't just a civil war, it's just complete chaos. There's so many different groups fighting, and there's also so much we can do about it, because most of the civilian deaths are actually caused by airstrikes orchestrated by the Saudi Arabian government, which is supplied by the United States. So just by ending this simple arms deal, we could be saving thousands of lives each year, and it would just have such a great impact on the society of Yemen. Some other things that we could do is we could provide economic aid to help people, because the famine in Yemen isn't just because there is no food. Yemen's getting food, probably not the amount that it needs, but as we learned from a journalist named Safa Al-Ahmad that we were able to Skype with that had been recording in Yemen, she really explained to us how the food in Yemen, there was food in Yemen, no one had the money to buy it. And that's just really where this whole crisis comes from. A lot of it's economic, and a lot of those economic issues are actually contributing to more fighting and more groups getting involved. And it's just becoming this all-around terrible problem.
In addition, we've also learned about the Khashoggi case recently, in which a Saudi Arabian journalist was dismembered and killed in Turkey. And it kind of really just highlights a lot of the issues going on between Saudi Arabia and Yemen at this time.
And this further goes to question, why are we supporting this government? If they're doing these terrible things that go against our morals and ethics, what gives us, like, why should we support that? It's hurting people, and the fact that we're not doing anything about that is really terrible. So first of all, lastly, we would like to thank you for listening to our video, and hope it has some impact on your views on Yemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.